Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I am recording from Bloomington. Last week, I rebooted an interview from last year with Hoosier author Jared Yates Sexton. I thought it important to take another look at the crisis of masculinity in the wake of last month's election, in which men overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump. Among other things, Jared and I talked about the Manosphere, a loose network of websites, blogs, forums, and podcasts, nominally dedicated to topics of male interest like sports, video games, gambling, and women, but practically dedicated to cultivating grievance and misogyny in lonely young men. Trump and his surrogates spent a lot of time in those spaces in the lead-up to Election Day, and their investment paid off. Young men moved toward the right by almost 30 points from 2020. More and more, young men's political views are being shaped by influencers like Andrew Tate, Aiden Ross, Theo Vaughn, the Nelk Boys, Tony Hinchcliffe, Jake and Logan Paul, and especially Joe Rogan. Today, I turn to one Gen Z Hoosier to ask about his generation's media diet and why those Manosphere personalities appeal to guys his age. Dylan Noble is a junior at Butler University in Indianapolis. From Fishers, he served as campaign manager for a friend of the pod, Katrina Owens' state Senate campaign. In this conversation, we'll talk about all of that, as well as what young men want to see from their leaders, how the left can appeal to this group, and who's doing a good job of communicating a positive, progressive vision that Gen Z guys can get behind. But before we get to the interview, please consider supporting Who's Left with a paid subscription. I currently work as an independent craftsman to pay the bills and work on this project whenever I can. There are so many more things I want to do here at Who's Left: more campaign finance research, more live hangouts, a daily episode if we can get there, but I need your help to build this thing. So if you can, visit scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction, and maybe, if we reach critical mass, I can put down my tool belt and devote my full time to you, to this project, and to Indiana's future. So, if you have the means, please pause right now, go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. And while the best way to help this project is financially, if that doesn't work for your budget at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. Rate and review the show on whatever platform you use. This trains the algorithm to help new people find us. Follow me on social media, on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left. On Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, I'm at ScottRog78. That's SCOTTROG78. And I'm on Mastodon at ScottRog78 at Hoosier.social. Please subscribe on whichever platforms you use and send me a DM to discuss ideas for the project. But most importantly, spread the word. Forward the articles to friends, family, and colleagues. Don't just like, but share on social media. Invite others to our little corner of the Indiana left. And while I might be the guy with the microphone, I try to take this thing where your input leads me. So, please be generous with feedback, good or bad. I value it all. To those who have joined this community already, especially those paid subscribers, thank you so much for your support. And to everybody, thanks for listening. Now here's my interview with Dylan Noble. I'll have thoughts on the other side. Dylan Noble, welcome to the Who's Left podcast.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Hey, I really appreciate you being here. Why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers here, since they don't already know you?
Yeah, I'm a long-time listener, so I'm glad to be here. As you said, my name is Dylan Noble. I'm 21 years old. I'm junior at Butler University. I'm studying political science with a minor in economics. I'm originally from Fishers, Indiana. lived around, in central Indiana my whole life, and I live downtown Indianapolis on campus right now. And over about the past year or so, I've worked in campaigns around Indy, but I've paid attention to politics for about 7 or 8 years.
You worked on Katrina Owens' campaign this year.
Mm-hmm.
I know it was not the outcome we wanted to see, but she was a great candidate, and I think you did a great job.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a hard playing field,
Yeah, we had the result that a lot of Democrats had that night. It was yeah, it was not the best night for us. It was not what we wanted, but I'm very proud of the work we did. And the 22,000 votes we did get. It was a very transformatory experience for me.
Yeah, you know what? And even if we didn't win, you learn a ton in the process.
You learn a ton, and you build the infrastructure for next time. You chip away at those structural disadvantages the best you can. And I've learned so much. I'm definitely, I'm going to take everything I've learned forward into future campaign. I intend to keep working on campaigns, and I don't think Katrina is going anywhere either. I know she's going to continue to be, presence in local politics.
I hope she sticks around. She's amazing.
She's a fantastic candidate, fantastic person. Absolutely.
What got you into politics? You said you've been following for about 7-8 years. I mean, that's certainly interesting times we live in. There's been a lot of content for you to digest.
Yeah, well, about 8 years ago was the 2016 election. Of course, I was about 12, 13, just sort of entering, becoming conscious of the world. So I think I got interested in politics around then, partially because of that. I had a background, and I was always good at like English and interested in history, stuff like that. So politics was kind of like a natural evolution of that. I first was really captivated by Bernie Sanders, actually, his candidacy in 2016. So I think that, was very formative to me and politically. I think it was just a combination of interests I had and just the right time, and all the controversy and all the news around that election and everything with the Trump administration. It was easy to get into, and I paid attention to it since then. And about a year or so ago, I decided to get involved, and I haven't looked back.
Where when I was the weird teenager who was into politics, there was, one cable news channel and network TV. Where and newspapers, real newspapers that get your fingers dirty. The old man yells at cloud. But where are you getting the majority of your news?
Right now, I get a lot of my news. I mean, I get basic headlines and stuff, just as notifications on my phone, from all the big news outlets, or I'll see them on Instagram or whatnot. So I get kind of the headlines from there. But and when I'm actually getting news or consuming news content, a lot of it is via podcasts or online. I mean, there's the one political podcast I listen to all the time is Breaking Points with Crystal and Sagar. I don't know if anyone, the audience, has heard of that, but I would recommend them. It's great. It's interesting because Crystal Ball is a very progressive person, and Sagar Enjeti, the other host, is more of a conservative or a Republican, and it's really interesting hearing them talk. But they both have a kind of anti-establishment sort of a new media vibe to them. Which I always really I like that perspective. So I'll read New York Times articles and whatnot, but if I'm really diving into politics and news, I find I turn to podcasts like that a lot, or like this one.
I appreciate that. So what I'm getting at, like, how do you know who to trust when you're out there getting your news and your politics. Like, I mean, obviously, New York Times, that's a big brand or whatever, but a lot of these podcasts, I mean, yeah, it could be any schmuck giving their opinion, like me.
Yeah. I feel like it's the best defense against that is just consuming a lot of different content and not getting I don't get all of my information from a single source. So, if I have multiple sources that back up something, another great, like I read Mirror Indie, that's a local news source. They have a lot of great local politics news and stuff like that. So it's usually easy to fact check enough. And I just try to get multiple sources for anything before I make a final decision on it.
Now we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. It's like, oh, may not be a representative sample of your generation or anything, but you're interacting with your generation more on a regular day-to-day basis than I am. Do you think like that experience is typical for other, especially like guys your age? Like where are they getting their information from?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what I've seen in my peers, I would say it's similar. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about podcasts a lot. That tends to be popular. The best I can glean is for most of my friends is like social media headlines and whatnot seem to be a big part of it, and some of it's also word of mouth. If there's a big news story, it will naturally get around a little bit, or big events. Like a lot of my friends watched the debates, so sometimes that's more of an election specific thing. But it's a lot of that. But I'm also a little concerned that a lot of my peers aren't really that plugged into the news all that much. It can sometimes be a little hard to tell.
Yeah. So that's really one of the main things I want to talk about here tonight is the sort of rightward drift of men in particular. I mean, in this election, Trump's always had white men, especially white men without a college degree, right? But in this election, he gained with black men, he gained a lot with Latino men, and I think it's especially concerning that he gained a lot of traction with younger men, because young voters have always typically been a little more progressive, right? So what like, can you diagnose that? Why what the hell's wrong with you kids?
Yeah, in terms of the rightward shift of young men in this election, I mean, we saw a shift of, I believe it flipped, and my numbers are 56% of young men supported Biden in 2020, and that became 56% of young men supporting Trump in 2024. So it's kind of a recent shift, and quite a big shift. And it's hard to diagnose. It's a lot of things. I feel like the things that that you talked about a little bit, like sort of like toxification of gamer culture, like toxic masculinity, stuff like that, more social things. I'm sure that's part of it. I think a big part of it is also economic issues. I mean, if you poll young voters, especially young men, economic issues tend to be at the top of their mind, especially if you're, if you are, someone my age or young man, there's a lot of pressure from society to make money and be successful, have a career. So it makes sense that the economy would be top of mind. And I think in this election, the economy has not been great. People have really been hurting from inflation. Even though young people are as exposed to that, it's still, especially if this is their first election or whatnot, I mean, they'll remember the chaos of the last 4 years of COVID, and then the fallout of that and inflation and whatnot. I think just entering that environment as a young man, it can be easy to want to look for like the change candidate. And Trump was the change candidate who spoke to them on their level, who went on their, the podcast they listened to, and sort of likable masculine personality. Whereas Kamala Harris really did not try to appeal to that group at all, really. I mean, to young men, I can't really think of anything that the Harris campaign really did to stand out or try to appeal to young men, other than sort of condescending language towards. I know there's the example of like Obama had sort of a condescending speech towards young black men about having to vote for Kamala Harris, and I think so. There's some of that condescending talk towards voters that Democrats always can't seem to help but do, that turns some people off. The economic pressures and wanting that change candidate, and then yeah, some of it is like the the rise of toxic masculinity and the Andrew Tates and whatnot of the world is part of it. But like when I'm interacting with my peers, I don't know if the people I'm interacting with are representative either, but I don't see that as much. But I do see people care about the economy. I mean, you go to the business building here and it's all young men, it's what they're interested in, somewhat more so, I would say. So I would attribute it to all of that. And then the other big thing is also apathy. Like most young men did not vote at all. And so these are all the things we need to get into. But I would kind of be inclined to focus more on some of the economic issues and fighting voter apathy. I think that is a much bigger group than people who have moved rightward culturally. In my opinion, not that culture isn't super important, and obviously our politics are more cultural than ever, but that's sort of how I look at it. Yeah.
You ever listen to any of those like Manosphere podcast? You ever get into like Rogan or any of those, or like do your buddies like get into that stuff?
None of my friends really watch Rogan too much. I've definitely watched a few Rogan episodes. He's interviewed Bernie Sanders, and I'm a big Bernie Sanders fan. I believe if I remember correctly, he interviewed Andrew Yang back in 2020 as well, and that was kind of an interesting a candidate I was kind of interested in back then. So I've watched a couple of political Rogan episodes, and I've seen clips of Joe Rogan podcasts circulate a lot on social media. So yeah, I've seen a share of his content.
He certainly talks to everybody. Like Rogan himself, I don't know if he has an agenda. I just think he likes to talk about all sorts of wild shit with anybody. And like you said, he'll have Sanders on, he'll have Trump on, he'll have Jordan Peterson on, and he'll have like Neil deGrasse Tyson on. I mean, so he's kind of all over the place. Now, maybe people around him have an agenda as far as like who they're booking. I don't know. But he certainly, and a lot of the guys around him, just their whole podcast is just like hanging out with your bros, right? It's authentic and often crude, which it can get that way sometimes, but there's nothing, I don't think, like that on the left. That's like been one of the big diagnoses in the wake of the election. Like, the left doesn't have something to match that. Would that help? Do you think that would resonate?
I've heard that described a lot. I mean, yeah, if you look at like the top 10 podcasts, it's like 9 of the 10 are right-wing podcasts. They absolutely do dominate, and it's hard to tell why exactly. I don't know why there's not really an equivalent force on the left, because if there was a cultural force of the same size on the left, I don't think we would be having this conversation. I think things would be a lot different, and things would be a lot, politics would be maybe more leftward in this country. I don't know, because politics is so cultural. So I don't know why that space doesn't exist on the left. There's absolutely a lot of like new media type people that have some more podcasts. Sort of the podcast I mentioned earlier, Breaking Points, is kind of like that. I know Kyle Lewinsky has been described as a sort of, equivalency of Joe Rogan to some extent, like on the left, but he's not nearly as popular. I mean, there are other popular streamers and whatnot that I'm personally not as familiar with. But I want to say
exactly. Right?
Yeah, it's like I'm trying to think of it, and I think Hassan Piker is a big one. He's a big left-wing streamer. I know he's pretty popular. So you can think there's a couple of names that are pretty popular, but that is definitely something that we need to think about as kind of like the left, like having more of a cultural presence when it comes to like podcasts and media that people actually consume, particularly young people, about how to break into that and how to overcome these, the massive numbers that some of these right-wing channels are putting up. I don't know how to do that exactly.
Well, yeah, and then they also have a ton of money behind them.
Yeah,
I mean, the right wing's always going to have a money advantage. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. But I think part of the thing with like Democrats, especially, and when I say Democrats and I say the left, I'm talking about entirely different things. But like Democrats kind of don't engage, I think, with young men and like bro culture and or lad culture, they'd call it in the UK, right? In a way, because of the the crudeness and the crassness sometimes, and I think a lot of times maybe they get stuck on that, the language, the language policing, and not the actual message at the heart of what guys are talking about. Because look, I know some wonderful guys, like really progressive guys. They go out, they vote the right way, they conduct themselves honorably with women in public, and but when we're together, things can get inappropriate, let's say, sometimes. And I think in a lot of like normie Democrat circles, like that locker room talk. If
Democrats,
if you're caught saying it on tape, like, you're done.
They're obsessed with decorum and being politically correct, I guess you'd say. It's, and I think that is part of it. Democrats sort of talk down to people who enjoy like Joe Rogan, and like you said, I don't think Joe Rogan has like an agenda or something. I know we keep coming back to him, but just as an example, but
he certainly is has the biggest gravitational pull.
Yeah, and when Democrats talk about him, they talk about him like he's some kind of villain or some kind of bad guy. And I think when people watch Joe Rogan, they do just see a guy who will talk with anyone about anything, and it's just very open. And so I don't know. I hear a lot of this language from Democrats about like, oh, they're young people, or this like kind of like bro culture. It's always talked about in a very derogative manner, and some of it's warranted. Locker room talk can absolutely be like sexist and inappropriate, but I think it's an obsession on it's word policing, like you said, obsession with and I don't think the Democratic Party pushes it as much, but I feel like in like the late 2010s it was more of a thing to and like early 2020s, but it still persists talking like a very academic kind of language about very, like when we say like toxic masculinity or the manosphere, like that's very academic. And most young men, or men in general, if they hear you talking about that, they're just gonna like, they don't know what that means, and it's like It just
It's like,
sounds
what are you talking
derogatory,
about?
and then they get defensive if it's derogatory. And so I don't think Democrats tend to approach these groups with an understanding or giving the benefit of the doubt. It tends to be more of a basket of deplorables kind of approach, which
And
which is not productive at all.
you, for example, we talked about this a little bit. You got your head on straight. It seems like you know what you're doing. You've got a plan, you've got a purpose, and you can
To some extent.
traffic in that academic language, but it's definitely, if you're talking to the average voter, male, female, no matter how old you are, the average voter is, I don't want to say they are simple, but it's nice to keep things simple and authentic, and you don't want to go deep in the weeds. Most people aren't political sickos like we are.
Yeah,
Most people are
no.
just trying to live life and pay the bills, get by. What about, say, guys your age? So I say back home, but back home is just a few minutes away. But say people that didn't go to college, guys that in your class that did after high school went right into the workforce, or maybe they're kind of having a hard time getting by, don't really know what they're doing with their lives. How can we reach those guys?
I feel like in that group, first off, there's a lot of that apathy that they tend to. I mean, with all of the pressures of being a young man or young person in general and trying to make a career for yourself and whatnot, it can. I mean, the way our modern economy is set up is definitely, it's very against you. And I think that's where a lot of hustle culture and stuff like that kind of stems from. And that's kind of the biggest group that goes towards that, how to make wealth. And that's part of why people like Andrew Tate get popular as well, because they talk about ways to build wealth. So I would say how to reach those people, you talk in their language about building wealth, not in the way that Andrew Tate would, but address
not with crypto scams,
not with crypto scams. But that's also another thing. Is young people do embrace crypto, to a much larger extent, to just bring up that part of it. And the right is very much seen as the pro crypto. The left is more anti crypto. That's being seen as a way to build wealth. And I think people are turning that stuff because, we live in an era of stagnant minimum wage, and, the billionaire class controls the vast majority of the wealth, and, upward mobility is it's hard to climb the social ladder. So people turn to those sorts of things, and young men in particular turn to those alternative ways to make money. Republicans kind of embrace that a little bit more. So Democrats, I don't know if they need to embrace it or just adopt the Republican position or whatnot, but talk about, the sorts of economic issues that I think Democrats used to run on, used to win big on. I think there are plenty of young men in the Sanders coalition. I think, when you're talking about Joe Rogan saying he would vote for Sanders and then saying he would vote for Trump, I don't think that's necessarily he moved to the right so much. I think a lot of
it's not completely incongruous.
Young people and stuff. It's I feel like it's more of a bottom versus the top, or more of a centralized or decentralized power versus centralized power kind of thing. Young men are right out of high school, right out. They might be just living on their own for the first time. The last thing they want is another parent or restrictions on them. So I think that also can kind of make them want to go for a more decentralized or go towards the party that talks about freedoms or less things imposed on you for I'm trying to say it's
I know what you're trying to say. do guys your age like comprehend that like my dad and my grandpa's generation, like when they graduated high school, they could walk into anywhere, get a job, and like, you know, live a comfortable middle class lifestyle, raise a family on one salary and retire comfortably. Like that was a thing that we used to have. Um and we don't have that anymore.
Uh-huh.
Like are you guys clamoring for that, or is it even something that like, or is that like a myth from the past? You know?
I don't think there's much cognizance of that. I don't think that economic environment, what you're describing, was even all that available to like my parents' generation. I mean, I remember my parents struggling plenty as I grew up. That really what you're describing is a well enough myth, and I don't know that very many people my age really are even aware that it once was like that. And I think that is part of the why I say things like crypto or hustle culture type things have become popular.
Yep.
It's that way to build wealth, because they don't know what a pension is, because we don't have pensions anymore, because we got rid of that in this country. So
exactly, that system, the like the New Deal consensus, right? What we're talking about has been replaced by the neoliberal consensus. The Reagan era, the trickle down. We're still living in the tail end of that, and like the reason things are the way they are now and so wild and crazy and chaotic is because we're trying to sort out what the new order is going to be. I mean, is that something that people would be receptive to? Like, hey, you know what? We could go back to this. And it's Republican policies, which many Democrats followed along with, that put us in this place now. They see the system is rigged against them and it needs to change.
Yeah.
And, in like we were talking about in crypto, they know the system doesn't work for them, so they're trying to find a way around the system, right? Trump is a bomb thrown at the system to try and
or at least present himself that way.
Yeah, and so would the blueprint for a new system be enticing? Like if we had that instead, it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, like, I get the urge to blow things up, but what comes after?
I would say, I mean, in terms of what people are receptive to, I don't think, very many people kind of know why your average guy my age just doesn't understand or doesn't study all the things that led us to this point. I mean, it's my whole major is like just trying to understand some of these things. But yeah, there's a sense, absolutely you're right. People understand the system is rigged against them, and I'll keep going back to Bernie Sanders. I will forever defend him. He had a campaign that addressed these issues and really did kind of say, let's go back to that New Deal consensus and that New Deal way of thinking about politics and just helping people materially. I mean, a lot of this just boils down to that. I think that tends to be the best way to win people over, and polls show that consistently. Democrats just can't do it because if they talk about economically populist issues, all of their billionaire donors shut it down immediately, and the Democratic Party has become so beholden to billionaires and ruling class that like even Kamala Harris's like few populist economic things that she put out, you heard about it a single time and then she didn't talk about it at all, and most people didn't even hear about it, so I think if it's pushed forward and like Bernie Sanders did, that was pretty popular. It's like, it's just people want change, and the only people really offering that is the right. If the left had the means to do that, or if the Democratic Party wasn't so beholden to billionaires, I don't think it would take a lot for people to go back to the party.
So, you're saying that you guys in your cohort aren't exactly like gung ho. They're not like full in on Trump and stuff. It's just like
not on Republicans.
Change.
I think the appeal of there is some appeal, I think, of Trump. Like it's just, I think he's likable. I mean, I think to some of us on the left, he can come across as extremely unlikable. It's hard to understand why people would like him. I hear that a lot. Like people just don't understand why, Democrats don't understand why Republicans would often like Trump. And I think it's just it's a different way of looking at things. And I think too, Trump just talks on young people's or young men's kind of level. So I think that's valuable.
that is true.
He's going with that, but that's I think that's the appeal of Trump. So I just wanted to kind of clarify. I think that a lot of this is appeal to Trump himself, seeing as because he articulates that outsider thing like pretty well, even though his first administration was not like all members of his cabinet were just like basic Republican types. And it's actually interesting this time he's nominating a lot more kind of like outsider type people to his cabinet positions. So I just think Trump himself has that outsider appeal. And when other people try to articulate that same Trump vision, it tends to not be as popular. It tends to not do as well. Of course, I don't think it's like I don't think it's loyalty or a move to the Republicans. I think Trump has some like unique appeal.
He's personally charismatic. And he definitely has that a willingness to just throw the entire system, which is rotten, under the bus. And I think, and I'm not going to like pick on you guys your age, because I think this goes for guys my age and guys older than me even, like especially white dudes growing up in America, was born into a place of privilege, like whatever may be wrong in our lives, whatever might be going badly in our lives, like it's not because of our gender or our orientation or like the color of our skin, right? And it's like a cocoon, we've been like sort of wrapped in this nice soft cocoon where things are generally set up well for us. And, even guys that aren't doing well are doing well relative to other groups, for the most part. And when the system doesn't work, like we said, we can feel, we understand the urge to blow it up, but that system is that cocoon that has been around us, has built that protection, that white privilege. And I don't think a lot of guys are going to appreciate it when that whole system comes down.
Yeah, it would depend on what that ends up looking like. I mean, I don't know what the future entails, but yeah, I think that structural advantage you're talking about it definitely exists in a broad demographic sense, but a lot of people don't feel it. I mean, a lot of young white men are not going to be feeling that even though it does exist. So I don't know how big of an impact even I don't know if talking about that at all is going to would appeal to those
Oh,
people or
actually
the
talking about
understanding.
it
I don't know.
backfires tremendously, right?
Yeah, they tend to see it as them as yeah, getting into the like the academic language that sort of treats them like they're somehow like
Yeah.
I don't know, like
Like, the
if a
job
young white
sucks, my boss sucks, I can't meet a woman. Where is this white privilege you're talking about? Yeah.
right, yeah, it can feel yeah like that. It just falls into that vein of like kind of condescending talk towards voters that Democrats sometimes engage in. So that's yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, boy, yeah. So I don't know how to. So we all know the system's rotten, right? And guys are all about, you know, creative destruction, right? Well, we're gonna knock it over and we're gonna build something new in its place. Um, I mean, Gen Z men aren't like all about Project 2025. I don't think. Like
No.
that's the blueprint for what the right wants to build to replace the current order. The problem, as I see it, is that Democrats don't have a plan to counter that. They don't have a vision for what they want to build. They don't have a blueprint for the future. All they have is, at least we're not that guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Democrats have become very used to just being like, we're not Trump. Look at what Trump's doing. Trump bad, and we're left with kind of no substance, and yeah, no plan. I mean, if you look at right now, there's kind of no real like democratic like resistance like in 2017 and whatnot. There was kind of a like more serious organized like resistance movement, if you will, against Trump among Democrats that doesn't exist now. I think it's where parties kind of reeling from the loss, and there's a sense of just like, yeah, the Democratic Party is lost and it doesn't really have any values because it's become so overrun by billionaires.
Yeah.
So like, of course, there's no blueprint or no plan or nothing to go off of. When the plan for the past 8 years has just been like Trump bad and then also abortion, but that all kind of seemed to work maybe in the 2022 midterms, but it's been kind of a while
Yeah.
And so it's like Democrats were able to get that midterm advantage in 2018, and then COVID advantage electorally in 2020, and in 2022 where there was the abortion thing, but like there's not any like super substantive like positions of the Democratic Party right now. I mean, if you look at what Kamala Harris ran on, it was mostly just kind of a vibes election that she just defended what Biden was doing and said the only thing she would do differently is have Republicans in her cabinet. She went around campaigning with war criminals. It's like,
yeah,
of course, young men don't want to vote for the Democrats. I mean, it seems obvious when you put it like that to me.
It's disingenuous, right? Well, you mentioned the resist movement or whatever, and I think even with a lot of that, when Trump first got elected, everybody was part of this resistance, but like, what did the resistance actually do besides like post hashtags,
Right.
and sell merch? Yeah, like it was token resistance, symbolic resistance, but not no hardball, right? I think dudes want hardball.
Yeah, the left needs hardball, and even a lot of like the progressive members of the House they don't fight as much as they could. I mean, we really should take a page out of like, we should look at like what the Tea Party was doing in like 2010 they had a very effective like kind of resistance movement to Obama, and a lot of it was like trying to win power. It wasn't like token resistance as much. I mean, I'm sure they were doing some of that, but like I feel like Republicans and the right is always pretty focused on winning power a lot more than Democrats.
Yes.
And the left tends to have a lot more, put a lot more importance on like symbolic things and protests and whatnot, when we really just have to be about winning that, the extra seats, getting to 50+1. I think it has to be about that. And also somewhat a bottom-up approach. Like the Tea Party focused a lot on school board elections, and the right loves to focus on school board elections and stuff like that, local elections. And Democrats are the most often absent in those local elections and those like bottom tier elections, which often those offices end up being the most important and the most impactful, and that influences, stuff moving up and the whole structure. So I think Democrats, yeah, absolutely, we need to be playing hardball, like you said, and focused on winning power and how do we win races and how do we win local races, especially.
Okay, so turning the job of writing the new Democratic platform over to Dylan Noble, right? And I'm saying, Dylan, how are we gonna, stop the slide of men in general, but young men in particular, to the right? How are we gonna stop that? What are we gonna do to get men back in a small d Democratic coalition?
Yeah, I think in terms of and small d Democratic coalition, like a coalition of parties, or you mean like into the
people that believe in democracy and not fascism?
Democracy over, yeah. So just like broadly, people who, yeah, if I would try to bring people over back from that, and I were to be doing that through the Democratic Party, I think the party needs to move towards more universalist language. I think young men tend to not be as focused on social issues and whatnot. And a lot of that's due to privilege and doesn't affect us as much. And
I don't know.
You can criticize that, but that's just how it is for a lot of us. Not like it's just young men are naturally not going to care as much about like abortion. It doesn't directly affect them as much. I mean, they should care. I care, but it's naturally, it doesn't directly affect them as much as it affects women who have that single issue to kind of rally around. So I think the Democratic Party should be more universalist and focused more, not saying get rid of our socially liberal positions and fighting for civil liberties and rights. I think that has always been, Democratic Party has had that on its platform and able to win in landslides even back in the 60s. I don't think that's I don't really accept the framework that like there's this like all of a sudden people are way more like racist or sexist than they used to. But I think people don't. It's just become like the main thing the Democratic Party talks about when people mostly care about the economy and their grocery bill. I mean, Democrats just as much as Republicans. So as I've been saying throughout this, would prioritize economic issues and an economically more populist platform. I'm in favor of unions and more worker protections. I mean, when you put things like higher minimum wage and paid sick leave on the ballot. I mean, that was on the ballot in Missouri, which went to Trump by double digits, and then it won like overwhelmingly. And so did abortion on that. So, and I even saw something that most abortion or socially, most abortion ballot restrictions or ballot provisions were voted on favorably by young people and even young men who voted for Trump as well. So it's not like that. So social issues don't care, or don't matter. But I think the economic issues, talking about that the economic pains that people are experiencing, high rent for student loans, and Biden tried to address the student loan issue somewhat, but it was absent from the platform essentially, or at least absent from the discussion in this year's cycle. So I think the Democratic Party, I think the winning strategy of the 30s through the 60s that the Democrats had, the New Deal coalition of focusing on, universally, materially improving things for people, getting people health care, getting people better quality of life. That tends to attract people across the board, not just young men, but all of the other groups that have gone so much towards Trump in this election. I just think the Democrats did not talk about that at all. Haven't really talked about that in a long time. And it tends to, it's the economy, stupid, it is. And immigration was also a big one. I think Democrats also need to seriously address the immigration issue. People do care about it, and we just, as the party doesn't have much of a response to it. So I think if the Democratic Party were to, develop some decent, immigration platform, I don't really know what that would look like exactly, pivot towards economic populism, keep the socially liberal positions, but talk about them with less academic language. Don't be condescending towards voters. Don't act like any group owes the Democratic Party their vote, or some sort of, that there's an entitlement there. I think do all those things and get away from the billionaires and the celebrity endorsements and all that. It doesn't work. Just get down to earth. How are we as a party, going to help you, and how can you be a better citizen in part as well? And fighting the culture war framework as well, and not doing that. So often, the Democrats will just concede to the framework put forth by Republicans about just stupid cultural non-issues that don't really impact 99.9% of people, like the trans kids in sports thing, but it becomes drummed up, and we need to just reject that framework and say, no, this is just about protecting people's basic civil liberties and rights under the Constitution. And we're going to do that. And we're going to fight for people materially. We're going to fight for all people materially. We're going to focus on that. We're not going to be in the pockets of billionaires and stuff. That's what I would do. And I would look to people like Sean Fain and even Dan Osborne's campaign in Nebraska as some evidence that working. And Bernie Sanders, people like Sean Fain and Bernie Sanders are consistently poll to be are very popular. So that's what I would do to win people back into this coalition.
Yeah. I think I like what you're onto there. Like, the Democrats have been eager to have this culture war with Republicans. Republicans start the culture war. Democrats are like, hey, we're more popular on all these issues. All right, we'll fight on this turf. And it doesn't work because they're fighting over icing, I think, to a lot of people. And
it's not what people vote on.
They want cake, okay? Like, the icing's great. Love icing, but you got to have the cake first. And if you take care of people's material needs, if they're doing okay, the immigration stuff, the trans stuff, the scapegoating doesn't work, because you don't need a scapegoat.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's a big part of the right wing politics for a long time has largely been about finding scapegoats to some extent or another. And you could even argue that on the left, Bernie Sanders' scapegoat was billionaires, or the left scapegoat's billionaires. But I think there's a little more there. There's a little more substance there in
yes,
talking about.
They actually are the problem.
Right? Yeah. No, not a 12-year-old trans kid. That's not the problem. That's not what we should be talking about. That we should be,
and that's the authentic talk Democrats need to have. Show some spine. Like, most guys, even, guys that voted for Trump, guys that are, susceptible to the right-wing manosphere stuff, they don't like bullies. Like, sure, some of them do, some of them are, but most people are like, hey, cut it out. That isn't necessary. Like, just treat everybody okay. And yeah, like I said, if Democrats would show that fight, show that spine, that would resonate. That would be authentic. And you can do both. You don't have to pick one or the other. You can take care of people's material needs and defend the marginalized, because the marginalized are marginalized because the ownership class needs to keep the rest of us divided in some way.
Yeah, and focusing on economic issues, often the economically populist policies do disproportionately affect minority groups anyways, or benefit. So yeah, absolutely. Like, we shouldn't abandon social liberal values or feel like we have to move to the center. Like, moving to the center never really works. It doesn't tend to work. Like, but just people need to be materially comfortable so they don't have that scapegoat. And then we need to talk about these things in just less academic language and not accept the culture war framework, as much.
Love it. Well, Dylan, let me put you on the spot here and have you give me some closing thoughts.
Yeah, so I'll just go back to kind of what I was saying at the beginning, that we can talk about the push towards the manosphere and toxic masculinity and all these things. And I think there's absolutely conversation to be had there, and that's something important and to be focused on. But if we're talking about electorally, which way young men swing politically, I think looking at the broad group of young people who are voting more on economic issues, who are concerned about their outlook, and then the people who don't care, the apathy. I mean, I think that's a much bigger group, and that we should be focusing on that group. And I think the Democratic Party, if that's going to continue to be the party that the left kind of exists in, and if we want there to be progressive change in this country and in the Democratic Party, I think it needs to move away from identity politics and academic language and putting these things first, and it needs to emphasize economic issues and building economic prosperity and making things materially better for people. When we push things like universal health care and higher minimum wages, they almost always win. People do want those things. You can go talk to Trump supporters and they want those things too. So we need to be pushing those things way more. And I think that's just the most effective way. And then when it comes to defeating apathy, I think that is going to draw more people. And I also think there's probably a greater need for civics education and stuff like that. It starts in the schools, and that's a whole conversation we had about curriculums and whatnot. I think we definitely need more civics education in this country. I think that's a big part of it, especially the apathy and the low turnout number. And so it's those things to a bigger extent. And I think when you focus on the economic issues and you focus on things like paid sick leave and higher minimum wage, and lowering the cost of living and the cost of education, that is going to take the all the energy out of any rightward shift culturally, because that stuff is fueled by that need to have a scapegoat that we were discussing. So, if you trust that economically, you're going to kill two birds with one stone there. And, the Republican Party right now, Trump in particular, has done a good job at making himself seem like the change candidate who's got a plan and who talks to young men where young men are and consume media. So, all of those things paired with the kind of weak Harris campaign. It didn't try to appeal to these to young men like me. I think that's the recipe. I would say just quit the condescension, talk to voters where they are, focus on economic issues. I think, if you do those things, I would be surprised if candidates lost on that platform.
Good stuff. Dylan, thanks for being here with me tonight. I really appreciate it. You're going to be in for a fight over the course of your adult life, I think. As we get through this crisis and build something new. And glad to have you in this fight. And you're a good seed.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it will be a fight for sure, but I'm one that I am excited to have, and I'm very energized to keep doing this work, and I'm very hopeful. I think hopefully this is a chance for the party to change and to try and meet voters where they are, and hopefully we can shake off some of this billionaire influence. And it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of fights against the party establishment, a lot of fights against the right, but I'm absolutely, all of it's in the service of just trying to make people's lives better and make it a better world. And I'm absolutely committed to that, and proud and happy to be doing this work. Not to toot my own horn too much, but I'm glad to exist in this space.
Once again, that was Fishers native and Butler University student Dylan Noble. About halfway through our discussion, I tried to make a point about white male privilege, and I don't think I did a great job. So I'd like to clarify and develop that thought a little further here. The terms were first coined by Peggy McIntosh, a professor at Wellesley College, in a 1988 essay with the clunky title, White Privilege and Male Privilege, a personal account of coming to see correspondences through work in women's studies. It's only 9 pages, a quick read, and absolutely worth your time. In her essay, McIntosh looks to identify and name invisible systems conferring dominance on one group, likening privilege to an unseeable weightless backpack of unearned assets you can always cash in, even though you're conditioned to remain oblivious to it. The key words there are invisible and systems. A lot of young white men are struggling after 40-plus years of neoliberal economics, so they say, "What privilege? What has it done for me?" Now, we know, from an academic standpoint, white and male privilege don't guarantee success, only that you don't face hurdles because of your race and or gender. This is little consolation to a guy with little opportunity for economic mobility and limited romantic prospects. If you can't see it, and you're not benefiting from it, is it even there? Now, in the meantime, while working class men's economic outlook has stagnated, they have seen women, people of color, and the LGBTQ community make significant strides towards social equality over the decades. Again, we know these marginalized populations still lag far behind white men economically. But if you're stagnating or moving backward while other groups are moving forward, and you extrapolate that trend out over time, and you don't understand the larger systemic forces at work, it's easy to see how you could fear being overtaken. This is how pundits like Tucker Carlson have introduced the Great Replacement theory, a 21st century version of the same anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that fueled Nazism, into the popular discourse. The Manosphere is full of this garbage. Americans are deep in debt and just about maxed out. As billionaires and corporations continue to hoover all of the country's wealth toward themselves, they're extracting from the one place that hasn't already been sucked dry. White men are not being overtaken. they're beginning to experience what it's been like for everyone else. And, as has been said, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Thinkers and philosophers since Thomas Aquinas all the way to the Dalai Lama have noted that anger is a response to the perception of injustice. So, in the face of all this perceived oppression, indignation, outrage, and resentment are to be expected. And it doesn't hurt that rage elicits a dopamine response. It's addictive. The anger, however righteous, is intentionally misdirected at other vulnerable people. Right-wing billionaires and hostile foreign governments, like dealers keeping junkies hooked, spend enormous sums propping up the Manosphere, convincing disillusioned young men that they are the victims of a feminized liberal society. By doing so, they keep us divided against ourselves, the powerless fighting each other while they accrue profit and power. You know, the 20th century American motivational writer William Arthur Ward said, quote, "It is wise to direct your anger towards problems, not people, to focus your energies on answers, not excuses." End quote. The right-wing bro-influencers and their masters offer lots of excuses for young men's sorry station in life, and plenty of people to blame. Again, women, racial minorities, queer people, and, the ever-present villain, the Jews. They keep the focus off of the real systemic problems, patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism, and off of real systemic solutions. Men's anger is a powerful weapon. If only it could be used toward good. I mentioned the Dalai Lama a couple paragraphs ago, and another thing he said is, quote, "Hatred expressed as anger will lead to destructive action. Compassion expressed as anger leads to positive change." End quote. The problem, as I see it, is getting young men to move from "I've been wronged" to "we've all been wronged" by the same powerful few. Young boys frequently engage in destructive play, demolishing Lego towers, knocking down sandcastles, disemboweling stuffed toys. And this is normal, age-appropriate behavior for toddlers. This is also about the time in boys' lives we're conditioned to suppress our emotions. Did we get stuck there? Our winner-take-all capitalist system certainly rewards creative destruction. But at heart, I think most men are fixers, often to a fault. As boys, we destroy, so as men, we can build. I think acts of service is our native love language. Only when we begin to see we're all in this together can we start to destroy systems of injustice and build something better. Thanks for listening. Thanks again to my guest, Dylan Noble. You can find him over on Instagram at DylanZNoble. Please consider supporting this project with a paid subscription at scottaaronrogers.substack.com. That's where you'll find everything I publish, but you can also find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left, and on most other social media sites at ScottRog78. My DMs are open for feedback, tips, ideas, and concerns, and you can also email me at scottrog78@gmail.com. Forward the show to a friend, have them forward it to another friend. Let's keep building this project and a more democratic Hoosier state. Until next time, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.